The top cop who put his badge on the line for justice.
You know the name Doug Poppa? Yes, I do. God bless Doug Poppa, an honest cop.
He was a man of integrity. His testimony last summer freed an innocent man from jail who had already been convicted of shooting his ex-wife. But Poppa's going public cost him his job as an undercover cop.
I was elated, of course, but then as he testified, I was somewhat concerned for him, because I knew that they were probably going to crucify that man.
Sometimes the truth has a price. That may be the lesson of a Virginia police officer who says, in trying to do the right thing, he ended up paying for it.
The message you're sending is, see, we did it, Doug. You don't come out, you don't buck the system. No matter what the reason is, you just can basically keep your mouth shut. But if I wouldn't do it all over again, I would take the badge and I would leave it on somebody's desk and get out of police work. Because the day I can't tell the truth because somebody's pressuring me, and the day the system doesn't want me to tell the truth because somebody's pressuring me, is the day I leave the badge on the desk and walk away.
Poppa was fired for insubordination. One man who confronted truth and consequences.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Truth and Consequences podcast, episode 127, for Saturday, November 19th, 2022. I am Doug Poppa, independent investigative journalist and former law enforcement officer. The subject of today's podcast episode is one Nikolaos Hatziefstathiou. First name is spelled Nikolaos, last name spelled Hatziefstathiou. He's also known, or was known as, Nick the Hat. He's a convicted felon, a fake news reporter, racist, fraud, and liar who is currently incarcerated in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. Let's take a look at this guy's criminal history here for a second. Audio podcast people, I'll be describing what's on the screen here in a minute because you're not going to be able to see what they're looking at here on this podcast. Let's wait till it loops through a couple of times. Okay, back up over there. Okay, in December of 2015, he pleaded guilty to possession of a controlled substance, harassment committed repeatedly in an anonymous manner, and filing a false report to falsely incriminate another. And at that time, he was placed on 2 years probation. Apparently, he didn't learn a damn thing from his 2015 charges, because on October 21st of 2021, Nick the Hat was found guilty after a 3-day trial on a slew of criminal counts: tampering with public records / information, forgery after writing, forgery uttering forged writing, and unsworn falsification to authorities, forged, altered document. In January of 2022, he pleaded guilty to other charges of theft of property, receiving stolen property, sell offensive weapon, and conspiracy. Now let's take a look at some of the news headlines from 2019 and 2021. Subject of Action News investigation charged with fabricating racist email. Pennsylvania man Nikolaos Hatziefstathiou busted for impersonating journalist. Nick the Hat guilty on all charges. Mountain of evidence paid off for prosecutors. Journalist at center of racist email scandal found guilty. Fake journalist convicted of elaborate forged email scheme, all for a story. He faked being a journalist and targeted Pennsylvania leaders. Now he'll head to prison. Nick the Hat gets 2 to 4 years in jail for fake racist email. Also poses reporters in emails. Let's say those stories go from 2019 to 2021. Now let's view 2 news clips. The first one is from Fox 29 Philadelphia that aired on July 24, 2019, and the second one is from ABC Action News 6, Philadelphia, that aired on October 23rd, 2021. Excuse me.
Delaware County man is charged with identity theft and forgery in connection with an alleged plot to embarrass a court probation officer. This bizarre scheme involves a 25-year-old self-described news reporter whom prosecutors say is nothing of the kind.
Our Bruce Gordon reports from the courthouse in media.
There he was during happier times, for him at least, posing for photos with Bill Cosby during Cosby's sex assault trial. Nikolaos Hatziefstathiou, self-described chief content officer at something called YC News. But the Delaware County District Attorney says Nick the Hat, as he's known, was not a journalist, but a fraud.
This defendant manipulated the facts and created a story, all made up by himself.
Prosecutors say Hatziefstathiou falsified documents to pose as a New York Times reporter and Good Morning America producer to ask the DA's office for comment on a racist email purportedly sent by an officer of the county's adult probation and parole office. The prosecutor says Hatziefstathiou created the phony email and tried to pass it off as a legitimate scandal to be reported on his website, perhaps in an attempt to disparage the probation officer who had supervised him after a past conviction.
In one fell swoop, he attempted to decimate years of well-earned and good reputations.
Says the district attorney of Hatziefstathiou.
He created this email. He created this false narrative. He created this problem and is now going to face the consequences.
Also seized from that home in Broomall a stolen police-issued taser. Nick the Hat is expected to surrender to authorities on Thursday. If convicted on all counts, he will be doing his next reporting from a prison cell. In media, Delaware County, I'm Bruce Gordon, Fox 29 News.
Well, Nick Hatziefstathiou, known by his nickname Nick the Hat, was found guilty of fabricating a racist email from a Delaware County probation officer. An Action News investigation first brought you this story 2 years ago in an exclusive report. Well, he runs a website called YC News, which is short for Young Constituents. Prosecutors say he altered an email to include racist language, then published the email on his website. He was found guilty of identity theft, forgery, and other related charges. Sentencing is set for next month.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me give you some more insight on what led to Nick the Hat's conviction on felony and misdemeanor charges, and I'll explain why I have an interest in this guy. Pennsylvania state prosecutors at the trial said Hatziefstathiou, quote, yielded electronic devices as weapons, unquote, by creating a racist email he claimed came from a Delaware County official who was probation and parole department supervisor Jeff Roney, spelled O-R-N-E-Y. He published a story on his website, according to the prosecutor, YC News in 2019, she said, saying a confidential source forwarded him the racist email he claimed came from Roney. That email, which he published in his article, used the N-word and mocked the county's black residents. When the YC News article was published, it caused an uproar in the community and outrage by local officials. As a result, an investigation was initiated that determined there was no such email in the county system. Investigators obtained search warrants for Hatziefstathiou's cell phone and laptop and discovered that he had created the email himself, using a legitimate email from his own probation supervisor as a template. During the trial, forensic experts recreated the process Hatziefstathiou used to fabricate the email by scanning the email he had received and used photo editing software to insert the racist message. Hatziefstathiou was also convicted of impersonating New York Times reporter Liam Stack, spelled S-T-A-C-K, and ABC News producer Stephanie Walsh, W-A-L-S-H, by using phony email accounts that he sent to the district attorney's office in 2019. During the investigation, detectives found evidence that Hatziefstathiou had emailed then-district attorney Kate Copeland from the phony accounts he created in the names of Stack and Walsh. In the messages, Hatziefstathiou, posing as the reporters, pressed Copeland for information about alleged harassment against him by a Marple Township police detective. During the trial, Senior Deputy Attorney General Kelly Sekula, spelled S-E-K-U-L-A, said, quote, "Worse than what he did to the direct victims, he attempted to use the scourge of racism to create a sensational news story in a pathetic effort to bolster his own profile. He tried to drum up attention for himself by creating the fake wash and stack emails, and when that failed, he turned his attention to a story that would generate sensational publicity, racism, in high levels of county government, and it worked," said the prosecutor, unquote. Prosecutor Sekula also said during the trial, quote, "This case boils down to one thing, one person, Nick. His ego, his need for attention, and his complete disregard for others. The defendant could have ended Jeff Ronnie's career. He could have ended the careers of any of the 10 supervisors in the Delaware County Adult Probation Office. He could have sparked racial unrest. He could have sparked violence. He didn't care," unquote. Delaware County Detective Edmund Pisani, spelled P-I-S-A-N-I, also testified at the trial. Pisani said he was familiar with Hatziefstathiou from a 2015 investigation in which he harassed his neighbors by repeatedly sending prostitutes to their door through an escort service, then calling the police on them. Pisani said Hatziefstathiou used the same racially charged language in that case, stating, quote, he said, "I like to watch ends get locked up and more ends are going to get in trouble." Hatziefstathiou pleaded guilty to harassment in that 2015 case and was sentenced to probation. At the sentencing hearing, Delaware County Judge John Capuzzi, spelled C-A-P-U-Z-Z-I, said sentencing is usually the hardest part of his job, but Hatziefstathiou had made it easy. He pointed to other instances of racism displayed by Hatziefstathiou, including an incident where he called 911 to falsely report that an officer had used the N-word over a police radio. Pointing to Hatziefstathiou at the table, Capuzzi said, "So the racism in this room sits right there at that table. You tried to direct that racism from your heart to the probation department and to Mr. Ronnie in particular." Capuzzi sentenced Hatziefstathiou in the aggravated range because he found his conduct was malicious and cold-hearted and was designed to degrade Ronnie, his office, and the county, which expended a great deal of money and other resources due to Hatziefstathiou's actions. In addition to prison time, Hatziefstathiou was ordered to serve 3 years of consecutive probation, pay for the cost of prosecution, and have no direct or indirect contact with the probation office. He is not eligible for early release from prison, and Capuzzi indicated there would also be a restitution hearing in the future. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, why am I talking about this guy? Okay, well, because in July of 2018, Nick the Dirtbag, as I call him, who I never met, published a libelous article on his YC News website, trashing my reputation, my name, and my work history for decades. Apparently, he was upset with some articles I wrote on Sylvester Stallone that were published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner. Now that he is a convicted felon for attempting to ruin the reputation of others, I would say that he has destroyed his integrity. But that would be false, ladies and gentlemen, because Nick the Dirtbag can't destroy something he never had. I wonder if his fellow inmates in the Pennsylvania prison are aware of what racist piece of white trash he really is. I'm going to play an excerpt from episode 6 that I published on July 17, 2020, that deals with this guy and my rebuttal to his fake news story. And I mentioned this briefly, I believe, in episode 124, when I talked about Las Vegas blogger Michael Zahara, who was arrested by the Las Vegas Metro Police for terroristic threats. And you'll see how this all meshes in when I play this video. I will have links to several news articles from media outlets that covered Nick the Dirtbag story in the description section of this video, as well as links to articles I authored on Sylvester Stallone that were published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner at the time. Remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel of Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa. Support my investigative journalism work at paypal.me/Doug Poppa. You can contact me at truthandconsequenceswdp@gmail.com. Now, here's the video excerpt. And thanks for watching and listening, folks. See you in the next episode. I'll play this full screen so you will not see me. Just watch the video, and I'll see you on the next episode, which is related to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. So that'll be upcoming shortly in a day or two. Again, thanks for watching. Enjoy the video. It's about 25 minutes long, but explains everything, I think, in a nutshell of what this guy said about me and my rebuttal at the time when I published this. In an apparent attempt to undermine and malign my character and integrity, in December of 2019, a fake Twitter account was opened using my Twitter photograph and the Twitter address @OneDougPoppa, which is similar to my actual Twitter handle. Refer to the screenshots for additional information. The Twitter page has photographs of me that were taken from the internet, and also a photograph of Sylvester Stallone with the comment, quote, "Doug Poppa is a liar and corrupt journalist / fake social influencer with zero credibility. Before reading his claims, get to know the gritty truth Doug hides." The Twitter page referenced the website, DougPoppa.com. I never had, nor do I currently have, any webpage. The webpage had the same photographs that were on the fake Doug Poppa Twitter account. The webpage identifies me as Douche Poppa, then continues with the quote, "Disgraced ex-cop and admitted wife-beater obsessed with Sylvester Stallone. Doug Poppa, an inside look at the man obsessed with Philadelphia icon Sylvester Stallone. Poppa was fired from the Loudoun County Sheriff's Department after illegally using police-issued equipment to set up surveillance on his wife before beating her. The crazed man attracted the attention of Daily Mail, Huffington Post, The Washington Post, and other major publications after claiming to have insider info on Stallone, but his credibility was poorly vetted by the publications. Quote, "Public record of domestic violence, an unruly sovereign citizen puts false narrative on sheriff." My comment on this: it's untrue and complete BS. I'm not a disgraced cop, nor am I an admitted wife beater. I have been divorced for almost 35 years. I never beat up my wife. I am not obsessed with Sylvester Stallone, although I did author several articles on Stallone back in 2015 and 2016, and I never claimed to have insider info on Stallone. It was no claim, it was fact, and my stories are always vetted, as I will describe in a few minutes. This GoDaddy website originated from the Las Vegas area. That is all I can say at the moment on that. The Twitter page and website was shut down a few months ago by the creators. Coincidentally, at the same time, an investigator for the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline was conducting his investigation into Judge Melanie Andrus Tobiasen. The DougPoppa.com website mirrored a libelous July 2018 story that originated from an obscure online tabloid news blog called YC News that is based in Pennsylvania. The headline to that story, and again refer to the screenshots, reads, quote, "Who is Doug Poppa, disgraced ex-cop and admitted wife-beater obsessed with Sylvester Stallone?" When I became aware of that story in 2018, I contacted YC News several times and told them to remove the story as it was untrue and libelous. It is still up to this day. The editor-in-chief and chief content officer is a guy by the name of Nikolaos Hatziefstathiou, who is also known as Nick the Hat. I did some checking into the background of Nick the Hat and discovered that, not surprisingly, I might add, that he's a convicted criminal. In 2015, he pleaded guilty in Delaware County, Pennsylvania court to harassment committed repeatedly in an anonymous manner and false report falsely incriminating another, and was placed on probation according to the court records. So much for the character and credibility of Nick the Hat. It doesn't end there, because obviously Nick the Hat didn't learn anything from his prior arrest and convictions. In the summer of 2019, Nick the Hat was in the headlines of the Pennsylvania media as follows, quote, Nick the Hat arraigned on racist email hoax, other charges. Quote, Delaware County District Attorney says man allegedly faked racist email from county employee and posed as New York Times and Good Morning America journalist. Quote, Pennsylvania man Nikolaos Hatziefstathiou busted for impersonating journalist. Quote, man to stand trial on charges he forged email, published story claiming probation officer is a racist. Wow, can all that be true? Nick the Hat publishing false stories about people? Couldn't be. Quote, prosecutors said he has a rap sheet that includes using a burner phone to make prank phone calls, doctoring videos from rappers Ice-T and Snoop Dogg as false evidence, and using forged paperwork to obtain a vehicle license plate that identifies him as a journalist. I will identify him as Nick the Lion Dirtbag, who has zero credibility. According to Delaware County court records, Nick the Liar is facing 17 criminal counts, including felony charges of tampering with public records / information and forgery, altering writing. Good luck, Nick. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. You will be hearing from me again in the future. Obviously, Nick the Hat was not happy with the stories I wrote on Stallone, for reasons I do not know. Regardless, he targeted me and published an untrue and libelous story that he refuses to take down. If there is an attorney in the Philadelphia area who would like to contact me, feel free to do so. In 2015, I obtained legal documents from a source concerning a secret settlement agreement that was made in 1987 between Sylvester Stallone and his half-sister Tony Ann Felitti. One of the documents that I obtained was a draft of a verified complaint that was to be filed in U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York in 1987, indicating that Felitti was requesting a trial by jury and asking for damages in excess of $25 million. The statement, dated June 29, 1987, read in part that Felitti was bringing the action against Stallone for damages sustained as a result of his sexual assaults on her over an 8-year period from 1979 through 1987. According to the agreement, Stallone denied and continued to deny and dispute all the claims of wrongdoing. The action never made it to court. According to the documents I obtained, which were verified by a source close to the family, in addition to a lump sum of $2 million, Stallone agreed to pay Felitti $50,000 for medical bills and psychiatric care every year for the remainder of her life, in addition to monthly payments of $16,666. As part of the settlement agreement, secret audio recordings, allegedly conversations between Stallone and Felitti that could have bolstered our claims of abuse, had to be destroyed as part of the settlement agreement. Tony Ann Felitti succumbed to lung cancer in 2012. I also obtained a copy of the $2 million check that was paid to Tony Ann Felitti. My story was published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner in September of 2015. In 2016, I obtained from a police source a copy of a 12-page 1986 Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department police report indicating that Sylvester Stallone and his then bodyguard Michael DeLuca were suspects in a possible sexual assault of a 16-year-old female at the then Las Vegas Hilton Hotel. The report I obtained had the names of the victim and other persons who were interviewed by the police redacted. The source who gave me the report did not identify any of the names to me. I knew the copy of the report to be genuine, as I interviewed a police source who was familiar with the investigation. Through my investigation, I located both the victim and other persons who had knowledge of the incident. I interviewed the victim, who is now a 46-year-old woman. The details of what happened to her, as she relayed them to me, corroborated what I had read in the police report. She gave me permission to publish her story, with the caveat that I keep her name secret. I honored her request. The Baltimore Post-Examiner published my story in February of 2016. Keep in mind that the police report was filed at the time the incident occurred in 1986, and the victim never publicly spoke about it until I made contact with her over 30 years later. In 2017, Alan Butterfield, a journalist with the UK-based Daily Mail, contacted me and stated he wanted to do a follow-up story to the one I had done the previous year. Butterfield requested a copy of the report, which I provided to him. Butterfield independently vetted the police report on his own, as one would expect any reputable journalist to do. The Daily Mail published their story, including a copy of the report that I had provided to them, and placed their watermark on the report. The Daily Mail reported in their story that retired Las Vegas Metro Police Department Detective Sergeant John Simolovich, who was head of the sexual assault unit at the time the incident happened, confirmed that the copy of the police report that I had given Butterfield was in fact a true copy of the original police report. In 2017, I was also interviewed by KTNV 13 Action News in Las Vegas about the story I had authored. They also requested a copy of the report, which I provided to them. They also independently verified the report. Here is an audio excerpt of the November 2017 KTNV news report.
Celebrities have stayed at the hotel and casino that's now known as the Westgate. Tonight, though, we're taking you back to 1986 when it was the Las Vegas Hilton. That's when police investigated an alleged sexual assault involving a 16-year-old girl and a major Hollywood star, Sylvester Stallone. After more than 30 years, those allegations are just coming to light. 13 Action News reporter Brian Callahan is live near the Westgate with more on why that case never moved forward. Brian.
Well, Steve, the now 31-year-old report is from when Stallone was filming a movie here at the hotel that was then known as the Hilton. The 16-year-old at the center of the investigation telling police she was invited up to his 27th floor room after hanging around the set for several days. Disturbing allegations. That's how those who have read the 30-year-old Metro Police report describe the allegations against Sylvester Stallone. Doug Poppa uncovered the report more than a year ago. The reports obtained by Poppa span 3 days and detail a sexual relationship between the 16-year-old, Stallone, and the star's bodyguard, with the 16-year-old telling detectives that Stallone told her, quote, they were both married men and that she could not tell anybody about the incident, and if she did, that they would have to beat her head in. The teen declined to press charges repeatedly, despite detectives noting that she was extremely emotional. Years later, Poppa says she's still dealing with those emotions. 13 Action News crime and safety expert Randy Sutton says it's clear the reports provided by Poppa are authentic. Sutton noted because the teen refused to prosecute, detectives never interviewed Stallone or his bodyguard, something he says would be done if the same allegations were made today.
It would have been handled very differently.
And a representative for Stallone called the allegations ridiculous, completely false, adding it never happened.
The 13 Action News crime and safety expert who authenticated the police report I had provided to KTNV is retired Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Lieutenant Randy Sutton. If you wish to review the entire 1986 police report that I had obtained, refer to the screenshots. I've been divorced for almost 35 years. That being said, the comments that were made by both Michael Zahara and Nick the Hat, who are both two peas in the same pod and are of the same questionable character and integrity, are untrue. I will briefly address those here. I have no record of domestic violence, nor have I ever been charged, arrested, or convicted of any crime in my life. I never once assaulted my ex-wife or anybody else I had a relationship with. Her attorney at the time put a bunch of nonsense in the divorce papers that I contested as follows. My attorney wrote, the allegations contained in paragraphs numbered 6 and 7 of the bill of complaint are denied, and by way of further answer, defendant affirmatively states that he never once been guilty of cruel treatment or mistreatment of the complainant, that he never physically assaulted the complainant, nor attempted nor threatened to physically assault or abuse the complaint. There was no evidence that I've ever done it because I didn't do it. What I didn't know at the time was that she was having an affair with another man, until I later caught her in the act. I had witnesses who testified on my behalf at the divorce hearing. My ex-wife pleaded the fifth when questioned about the allegations by my attorney. The divorce was granted to me based on adultery on her part. As far as my divorce, I have said numerous times over the years that the mistake I made back then is that although I was married to my wife, I was really married to the job, especially when I started to work undercover assignments. The sad fact is, the job that cost me my marriage, I ended up losing several years later for doing what every cop is supposed to do, tell the truth. That's ironic, isn't it? I'm going to reserve an entire future podcast to covering the events that led to the end of my police career in 1992. Right now, here is, in a nutshell, is what led to the end of my 12-year police career with the Loudoun County, Virginia Sheriff's Office. Lesson: do not cross that proverbial blue wall of silence. I was Criminal Investigator of the Year in 1986 with an excellent personnel record, including letters of commendation. Once I testified against the prosecutor and a sheriff's captain, I became a piece of trash and the subject of retaliation. No brag, just fact. In 1991 and again in 1992, I testified in court that the sheriff's office and the prosecutor's office withheld exculpatory evidence in the 1988 trial of a man who was accused of the attempted murder of his wife. After I testified in 1991, I asked then Loudoun County Sheriff John Isom to initiate an internal affairs investigation. I had just testified that Captain Vernon Beamer, head of the Criminal Investigations Division, and Commonwealth's attorney William Birch had withheld exculpatory evidence in an attempted murder case. I shouldn't have even had to ask for an IA investigation. That should have been done immediately, but it wasn't. At the time, Sheriff Isom told me that there would be no IA investigation and that I was to keep my mouth shut and ordered me not to talk to the media because all this would, quote, blow over. When he said that, he was talking to the wrong man and the wrong cop. I didn't keep my mouth shut, and this, as you will hear, did not just blow over. I wasn't going to let that happen, especially when they started to retaliate against me. I was an outsider who grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I didn't stand for it. What I did not know at the time, but found out much later, was that the defense team had claimed that Sheriff Isom perjured himself at the 1988 trial of William Douglas Carter. Keeping that in mind, here was I asking the sheriff why he wasn't initiating an IA investigation. Simple answer, he knew it would lead back to him. Listen to what I'm saying here. The sheriff's office and the Virginia State Police, when they got involved, refused and did not talk to people I had told them could possibly corroborate my testimony. They didn't want to hear it, and they never interviewed any of them. It was the private investigator for Carter's defense team that tracked them down. A retired sheriff's office lieutenant, a federal agent, and a federal probation officer were all subpoenaed by the defense at the January 1992 habeas corpus hearing. After I testified in January 1992, and prior to the judge making his decision, Senior Virginian Assistant Attorney General John Russell and Assistant Attorney General Robert Condon, who handled the habeas corpus hearing, made the following comments to journalist Carolyn Green from the Leesburg Today newspaper. Russell said, quote, "We were gathering facts to dispute Poppa's allegations, not support them." Condon said, quote, "It wasn't to our benefit to prove Poppa's allegations." To this day, those are two of the most horrendous statements that I ever heard coming out of the mouth of anyone connected to the criminal justice system. The Virginia Attorney General's office at the time weren't interested in finding out whether a man did not receive a fair trial because evidence that should have been turned over to the defense wasn't. In other words, they didn't care about getting to the truth. Here is the February 6, 1992 decision of then-retired Circuit Court Judge Arthur Sinclair, who was appointed to hear the habeas corpus motion in the William Douglas Carter case. Again, refer to the screenshots as I am reciting excerpts in the interest of time. Quote, "The shadow of a doubt is cast upon Investigator Poppa's testimony by the former Mrs. Carter, by Captain Beamer of the Sheriff's Office, and by Commonwealth's Attorney Birch, if not by others. The issues in this case are simple, i.e., did the former Mrs. Carter make the statement concerning shooting herself to then former Deputy Sheriff Poppa? Was the statement, if true, exculpatory, and did Poppa apprise members of the Sheriff's Department and the prosecutor prior to trial? The resolution of these issues places on this trial judge an awesome responsibility he would prefer to leave unanswered. It is my opinion that the testimony of Investigator Poppa is in all respects credible. His testimony has the support of equally credible testimony of the witness Harris, who stated that Poppa came to him with his story of what the then Mrs. Carter told him and asked for his advice. The decision of the court is simply that the petitioner has proven by a preponderance of the evidence that material evidence of an exculpatory nature was not revealed to the defense upon request at trial, which resulted in his conviction and present incarceration. He's entitled to have another jury at another trial consider that evidence. The writ of habeas corpus is granted, and the petitioner shall be released from confinement subject to his execution of a bond. I have plenty of support from citizens of Loudoun County, among others. Going back into my archives, here are a few examples. Thomas Murtaugh, attorney at law. Please accept my sincere appreciation for your courageous decision to come forward with information. Whether the defendant is ultimately convicted or cleared, he deserves a fair trial in which all the relevant evidence is presented to a jury. Alan Kerr, business owner. I would trust a good cop with my life. There are all too few good cops, but in my estimation, you certainly qualify as a good one. Charlie Skaggs, Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, Dulles District. I know that sheriffs in Virginia are damn near in the same class as congressmen in their exemptions from the laws that govern the rest of us. Like many other citizens in our community, I have followed your story with great interest. I believe that every public servant has an obligation to live by a standard of conduct that precludes even the perception that a conflict of interest exists between the public interest and private interest. I believe you have upheld this code of conduct to the highest standards, in spite of the great personal cost. It is refreshing to see people who reject sycophantic behavior and display some spine. This fact has not gone unnoticed in our community. My personal belief that you are a victim of a kill-the-messenger reaction on the part of certain officials in the county to protect themselves is one that is shared by many of my friends, including those on the Board of Supervisors. In July of 1992, I testified at the retrial of William Douglas Carter in Loudoun County Circuit Court. William Douglas Carter was found not guilty. On February 17, 1992, an article was published by Washington Post columnist Steve Toomey titled "The Strong Arm of the Law." An excerpt from his article is as follows. At the January 8th hearing, an attorney for the county asked Poppa if he had ever read a book or seen a movie about a New York City cop named Serpico, who fingered corruption in department ranks. The attorney seemed to suggest that Poppa had a Serpico complex, wanting more glory than facts. Sure, Poppa said he knew about Serpico, but he recalls saying, quote, "The only complex I have is the Doug Poppa complex, and that's to tell the truth," unquote. 10 days ago, after hearing from Carol Carter and Beamer and Birch, retired Circuit Court Judge Arthur Sinclair, who was appointed to handle the case, freed Bill Carter from prison and ordered a new trial. Sinclair said law enforcement had failed to disclose key evidence at Carter's first trial. The evidence was Poppa's. He was, said the judge, in all respects credible. On April 3, 1992, Brett Phillips, the owner, editor, and publisher of the then Leesburg Today newspaper in Loudoun County, published an editorial titled "Firing a Cop." The Loudoun County Sheriff's Department has fired Deputy Douglas Poppa for allowing a CBS crew to follow him around during the first week of March to film an upcoming segment of Street Stories. We wonder what would have happened to Poppa if he had arrested an entire network film crew for standing on public property. He'd probably have been fired for that too, which says a lot about the way in which this guy has been handled by his superiors from the outset. Firing Poppa for being filmed from the public right-of-way while serving as document at a private residence is a real oddity when juxtaposed with the Sheriff's Department's seasonal habit of calling in the press, including film crews, to barge into private citizens' homes during drug raids. Poppa was also charged with refusing to stop talking to the press about an ongoing criminal investigation. Actually, what he was talking about was his claim that the authorities were trashing his reputation for testifying that he had given those same authorities information in a criminal case which should have been turned over to the defense. Throughout this process with Poppa, senior members of the Sheriff's Department have made derogatory statements to this newspaper impugning the man's character, mental state, and use of prescription medicines. They'd never come right out on the record with their comments, but would dangle them and then retreat behind no comment when it came gut check time. Poppa gets canned, however, for openly charging that his bosses neither supported him when he came forward nor attempted to find out who was telling the truth by holding an internal affairs investigation about his allegations, one which would have put both Poppa and the deputy to whom he supposedly gave information on a polygraph. Instead, the administration has concentrated its efforts on forcing Poppa to stop talking to the press by holding 2 internal affairs investigations over, of all things, his talking to the press. Why was the administration so determined to hammer him rather than address the very testimony which started this whole thing? Didn't it ever occur to the administration that Poppa went to the press because he believed his career was being ruined? Because he felt he had nowhere else to go to protect himself? The superior who gave Poppa an order to prevent the CBS crew from following him may very well have issued an order conflicting with the wide range of state and federal laws. How about that possibility as a starting point for a more interesting and perhaps telling internal affairs investigation? If Doug Poppa is the buffoon his supervisors make him out to be, they sure seem to have accidentally made him appear to be a cop who was railroaded for telling what he believed to be the truth, even if that information had turned out to have no bearing on the outcome of the original case. I must make further comment here of Brett Phillips, the owner, editor, and publisher of the then Leesburg Today newspaper, who wrote that April 3, 1992 editorial I just read. In 1991, after speaking with Brett and one of his journalists, Carolyn Green, Brett started the ball rolling, publishing one story after another on what I was going through. Carolyn Green kept digging and digging, and she wouldn't stop. Brett, along with Carolyn, were relentless in the paper's investigative stories, attacking the local prosecutor and the sheriff's department in a quest to get to the truth. What I didn't know at the time, and found out 25 years later, that Brett was literally putting his Leesburg Today newspaper in jeopardy. He was being pressured to back down from the stories about the prosecutor's office and the sheriff's department that he was publishing. Brett never did back down. I have so much respect and admiration for both of them for what they did for me. Brett started the ball rolling, and other newspapers, the Loudoun Times-Mirror and the Washington Post, followed suit. Carolyn Green passed away in February of 2017. Brett Phillips passed away in September of 2019. Peter Arundel, the owner and publisher of the Loudoun Times-Mirror, wrote a tribute to Brett after he passed away, titled Brett Phillips in Appreciation. Here is an excerpt. More than a decade later, 1988, Brett rallied a group of local investors to launch Leesburg Today, competing directly with our family-owned Loudoun Times-Mirror. Among the reasons for the startup was his belief that the community needed an alternative paper in design, content, and opinion. He shared with us an abiding respect for watchdog journalism and lamented after he sold Leesburg Today in 2006 that the paper buckled from its original purpose. There was a stand-up example of Brett's doggedness when he covered a local story in 1991 about a sheriff's deputy named Doug Poppa, who had testified in court that a local prosecutor and a sheriff's captain had withheld exculpatory evidence during the trial of a man who was later convicted of attempted murder. The prosecutor and sheriff's department attacked and threatened Poppa. Brett relentlessly pursued the truth, while his own investors pressured him to back off the story. Brett didn't cave, ultimately restoring the good name of Poppa. After I lost my job in April of 1992, in June of 1992, I was approached by a former lieutenant from the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office who wanted to recruit me into a plot with him and others to kidnap an heir to the DuPont fortune. He said that my prior experience in undercover and surveillance operations would be valuable to them. I immediately reported the contact with him to an FBI special agent who was involved in the investigation of the sheriff's office at the time. I was later asked by the FBI to infiltrate the group in an undercover capacity and obtain evidence against the conspirators, which I agreed to do. On June 10, 1994, I received a letter from Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, Lawrence Lizer, as follows. I am an Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia and have been a prosecutor since 1975. During those years, I have had the pleasure and honor of working with a large number of federal, state, and local law enforcement officers. I believe that my experience as a prosecutor, as well as my contact with law enforcement personnel, gives me a good insight into the qualities that are necessary to be an effective law enforcement officer. In 1992, I was assigned a case that involved the proactive investigation of a group of men who were plotting to kidnap an heir to the DuPont fortune. Due to a unique set of circumstances at the time, Doug Poppa was in a position to be made aware of this kidnapping scheme. He immediately reported his knowledge to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and was asked to work with them as a cooperating individual. This was no small request, since it demanded some degree of risk and a considerable amount of time by Mr. Poppa. Nonetheless, Doug never once hesitated to commit himself to this investigation. As a result, court-authorized wiretaps were installed, and the investigation was brought to a successful conclusion. As a result of that case, I got to know Doug Poppa both professionally and as an individual. I can say without any hesitation whatsoever that Doug is one of the most scrupulous law enforcement officers I have ever met. Time and again, he has stepped forward to do the right thing, even when it was not in his best interest to do so. Doug is a man of many qualities, as well as a professional, effective, and successful law enforcement officer. His integrity and honesty are beyond reproach. I would be proud to work with him on any investigation/prosecution. I know that he would work tirelessly, professionally, and very effectively on any case to which he was assigned. Doug is a truly talented, gifted law enforcement officer who, in my opinion, would complement the staff of any police department or law enforcement agency. I would be more than willing to further discuss Doug Poppa with any interested party. I can be reached at the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. In January of 2012, I was fired from my position as Director of Security and Surveillance at the then Riviera Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas after I had reported to the Enforcement Division of the Nevada Gaming Control Board that I had been informed by the Director of Advertising that the Senior Vice President of Gaming Operations had ordered that a slot machine be rigged as to not allow a jackpot to be paid out, and that the President and CEO and the Vice President of Operations knew about it and took no action. I filed a wrongful termination and whistleblower retaliation lawsuit. My attorney at the time told the Huffington Post that the case falls squarely under Nevada's whistleblower protections, and then she said, quote, Mr. Poppa did the right thing and attempted to correct a wrong perpetrated by the Riviera against the public and its customers. The civil action was settled out of court by the corporation in 2013. I authored over 135 stories on the October 1st, 2017 Las Vegas massacre, the worst mass shooting in American history to date, more than any other investigative journalist in the country, and broke many stories resulting from my investigative efforts. I debunked several conspiracy theories along the way and backed up what I had written. I was the only investigative journalist in the country that predicted very early on that the civil action brought against MGM Resorts International by the victims' families and the survivors would never see the light of day in a courtroom, and also backed up those assertions in my stories. The Las Vegas massacre was entirely predictable and foreseeable, and I drove that point home in countless articles. As a matter of fact, one or two of my investigative stories were actually used as exhibits in court motions early on by the victims' attorneys. I mentioned earlier in this podcast that I have been asked numerous times over the years why I had devoted so much of my time, even to this day, investigating stories that I do not get paid for. Like I said earlier, sometimes money is not everything. A simple thank you for the work I have done is enough, knowing that in the end, I made a difference in somebody's life and hopefully continue to do so to this day. It's all about uncovering the truth. That's it in a nutshell. Here is just a sample of some of the comments I had received about my work on the Las Vegas massacre. I remember this one gentleman who commented that in order to find out what's going on in Las Vegas, you have to go all the way to Baltimore, referring to the fact that I was investigating from Las Vegas, but my stories at the time were being published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner. April 3rd, 2018, from Dr. Larry Barton. PhD, and instructor at the FBI and U.S. Marshals Academy. I don't know if our paths ever crossed, but your analysis of this Las Vegas massacre is one of the most accurate, insightful, and meaningful pieces of journalism I have read in my 30 years of addressing workplace violence. Please keep researching and writing. We need you, society needs you. The cover-up about MGM and the other properties, the cone of silence, is itself reckless if no more. Thank you for your incredible efforts. June 4th, 2018, Mr. Glenn Klinker. Thank you, Doug Poppa, for your articles. I was at the concert that night with my family and have many questions while we had to run for our lives. All of your articles have been reassuring to what I actually went through. Please keep investigating and reporting the truth behind the day our lives changed forever. July 19, 2019, Ms. Avona L. Murfitt. Doug, thank you so much for your article and your continued devotion to finding out the real truth in all of this. I lost my son in this massacre, and like so many others who lost family members or whose loved ones are suffering lifetime injuries, we just want accountability, recognition of what went terribly wrong, and then resolution so it never happens again. There is so much more to learn, and we are disappointed that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department considers this a closed case when all of our pieces are still missing. We are entitled to know the truth. Thank you also to the Baltimore Post-Examiner for its support of the victims of the crime to allow challenges such as this to be made public. During the time I was investigating the Las Vegas massacre, I had the pleasure to meet a great attorney and a wonderful lady, California attorney Catherine Lombardo, no relation to Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo. Catherine was one of the attorneys who was representing some of the victims of the massacre. Catherine and I appeared on several news programs discussing the mass shooting. This is what Catherine Lombardo said about my work while appearing on the Jim Paris Live radio show on January 7th of 2019.
Because Doug did a wonderful investigation on this, and I can't say enough wonderful things about Doug Poppa and all of his investigating. He has benefited everyone immensely. He's the one that knows more than anyone. He's the one that has been on the ground investigating this.
Sadly, Catherine Lombardo lost her battle with cancer and passed away on September 18, 2019 at the age of 54. Journalism is about informing the community. The public has a right to know what's going on behind the scenes. That edict has taken a back seat way too many times by the so-called professional mainstream media. Independent investigative journalism is rapidly taking a front seat in this country today. Yes, there's a lot of nonsense out there, but there are decent independent investigative journalists, like myself, who want nothing but to uncover the truth and report on the stories that other news outlets refuse to do for whatever reason.